Hello and welcome to my studio. My name's Derek, a professional stained glass artist, and today we're going to talk about designing for stained glass, and I'm going to give you 5 solutions to problems that beginners often have when creating their first stained glass window. So let's start with the basics and spend a few moments talking about what makes a good stained glass design. In its simplest form, a stained glass design should be relatively easy to make, look beautiful, and be built to last. The problems I see with a lot of beginners who are creating their stained glass designs is they don't understand a few simple principles that you have to bear in mind when you're designing for stained glass windows. Let's start with a very simple design and we'll work up to more complicated designs as we go through this tutorial. The design stage is actually a really important stage because this is the stage that we iron out a lot of the problems that we might face further down the line in terms of the difficulty of cutting the shapes that we're making our leaded glass window into. How we design this leaded glass window is going to be really important in how easy it is to make and how robust and strong and fit for purpose it is when we come to actually lead it up. So the number one mistake that I often see beginners making when they're creating their stained glass designs is not understanding how glass likes to be cut. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take this shape here as an example. Any pieces of glass where you cut into the body of the glass is going to create the potential for a weak point, especially a sharp point like this. That is, generally speaking, a weak point where eventually the glass is going to crack. Let's take this example of a leaf design. As you can see here, it's pretty clear where the weak points are. The weak points are going to crack across areas like this where you've got sharp points of glass. You can design that problem away by anticipating where the cracks are going to be and creating interesting lead lines that are part of the design. That solves the potential problem of glass cracking in the future and also creates a really nice aesthetic solution. And this is the typical way of creating background areas in your design to solve the problem. And here's the beautiful panel as a complete piece. Another example where the sun has been placed too near the edge, creating weak points again. So we solve that problem by anticipating where those cracks are going to be and putting lead lines in position, solving that problem before we ever have to cut our first piece of glass. Mistake number 2 is trying to create over-complex shapes out of single pieces of glass. It may look great on paper when you've designed it with a complicated single piece of glass, but it can be a nightmare when you come to cut that glass. You'll get frustrated, you'll break the pieces, and you'll waste a lot of glass in the process. I know from personal experience this can become a problem if you've got a small amount of a particular color you want for a design, and you've created a very complicated shape for that single piece of glass. If you cut that piece of glass incorrectly, you've basically used up your stock value of that glass, and it becomes a problem in the long run. We can solve that problem by designing it away at the outset, by creating shapes using smaller sections of glass to create that overall shape that we're looking for. Here, I'll give you an example. These are large, complicated pieces of glass as single pieces, and the potential is they're going to crack along these areas here. So once again, at this stage, we solve that problem by adding more lead lines in so that it becomes part of the design and solves the potential problem. Here, I've added vertical and horizontal lines to the design to create something which I feel is actually even more appealing than the previous design. Mistake number 3 is not paying enough attention to the surrounding shapes that are holding the main shapes in place within your design. You've got positive shapes and negative shapes in your design. What I mean by that is the positive shapes are those shapes within your design that you want your audience particularly to see. It might be the main motif in a design, or it might be a flower. Whatever that main focus is, you'll be creating a variety of shapes within the design to show your audience what they should be looking at. pay close attention to the negative shapes around that, the pieces of glass that are holding the main design in place. Again, you can solve a lot of the problems that you might encounter when you come to make the window at the design stage by taking careful consideration about those surrounding shapes. Again, let's have a look at another example. This is a more complicated design with a variety of flower motifs together. So these images here are the main images that we want our audience to see. The background at the moment is very banal and bland, so we can do a lot more with that. I've added more foliage, more leaf motifs, and really abstracted that background to create a much more interesting and engaging design, being careful to make sure that the background shapes can be easily cut. And here is that finished panel. Mistake number 4 is not giving enough consideration to how a window might be supported, especially a tall window or a window that's going into a front door, for example. In both those situations, you have to have adequate structural support around the window to make sure that it doesn't buckle or bow in time. Especially a front door panel. A front door panel is subject to a lot of fatigue as the door is opened and closed, so make sure that there's enough saddle bars in place to hold that window rigidly into position and it doesn't buckle over time. If you're fortunate enough to make a larger window for a public building or a church, for example, a tall window will need regular support bars in place. Now, these horizontal bars, which you may be familiar with, and we see them in churches, are called saddle bars. They're basically supporting bars onto which you tie the stained glass window using copper ties. Now, these are normally placed at regular intervals up the height of a window. Normally about 12 inches separates each bar to give it support against wind pressure and structural movement. You really want to make sure that that window is held in place. So again, at the design stage, you're thinking about where those supporting bars are going to be, whether it's a front door panel or a stained glass window. What you don't want to do is have an important feature within your design obscured by a bar. It may be an inscription or a face or an important feature within the design you want to place in a position so that it's in between two saddle bars rather than having a bar running directly across it. Mistake number 5 I see many beginners making when they're designing stained glass is not being bold enough with their use of lead and understanding that the lead lines play a really important part in giving an aesthetic quality to the design. Use your lead lines creatively. They're not simply there to be wrapped around each shape. Traditionally, stained glass windows have used lead in service of an image, so they've been used as a perimeter to just create a black line around a particular shape. Contemporary designs have evolved so much from that, where we now use wandering lead lines as a really key part of the whole design aesthetic. I'll give you some examples of what I mean. If you're designing a new stained glass window, you're going to get to the point where you're doing your lead line work, and how you decide to divide your window up, whether it's a traditional design or a much more contemporary design, has a massive outcome on the viewer experience. So those lead lines are really key. When I design my stained glass windows, the lead lines are the first thing that I design. The first important factor is how that structural element of the design holds together, how I lead the viewer through the design with lead lines, those graphic elements, dividing the design up in interesting and exciting ways. When we think about stained glass, we tend to think about the color of stained glass. It's really important as a creative to also think about the lead lines. They are absolutely key, and they're an important part, not to be ignored, not to be thought of as simply a structural element to service the painted detail. It is absolutely integral to the overall impact of your design. If you've enjoyed today's video, check out this video next as you continue your stained glass journey. And remember, I have stained glass online courses available for you, both in how to make stained glass windows and how to paint on glass. And I'll leave details below this video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.